The baby monitor was still on when I heard them plan my murder. I'd been lying in bed, recovering from my fall down the stairs, the fall that left me bruised when it should have broken my neck. My son David's voice came through the speaker on my nightstand, clear as daylight. "Mom's getting suspicious about the handrail. We need to move faster." That was David, my David, who used to bring me dandelions. "The insurance adjuster comes Thursday. If she has another accident before then, the payout doubles with the rider we added. 72 hours. That's what they'd given themselves. Jessica, his wife, the woman I'd trusted with my house keys. It has to look natural this time. No loose screws. Maybe something with her medication." I reached for the monitor, but too late. The red recording light had been blinking for an hour, saving every word to the memory card I'd forgotten was inside. My son and daughter-in-law were planning my death like a grocery run. The fall hadn't been an accident. The loose handrail, the bath mat, the wrong medication dosages, none of it coincidence. Stay with me, because they forgot the house could keep proof. The recording was still running when they planned my death. It started 3 years earlier, the day David showed up at my front door with 2 suitcases and a practiced sadness in his eyes. "Just until I get back on my feet, Mom. Jessica and I are going through a rough patch." I opened the door because that's what mothers do. I washed the guest sheets, cleared a closet, and told myself I was giving my son a soft place to land. I thought I was helping him rebuild. I didn't understand I was handing him the blueprints to dismantle mine. The first month felt like a return to something I missed. David carried the grocery bags without being asked. He fixed a gate that had squeaked for years. He offered to replace a few bulbs I couldn't reach safely anymore. Small kindnesses, the kind that make you say thank you and stop checking the locks twice. Then the second month arrived, and help started coming with opinions. The groceries became his brands, his preferences, his receipts. The gate repair became a conversation about security improvements. New locks, motion lights. A doorbell camera, he said, would protect me, even though it made me feel watched inside my own home. When Jessica finally moved in, it was explained like paperwork. "The divorce is complicated, Mom," David said. "It's easier if we stay together during mediation, for legal reasons." Jessica didn't ask if it was all right. She simply began to occupy space, her skincare bottles lining my bathroom sink, her shoes at my entryway, her voice in every room. David's laptop lived on my coffee table. His charger never left the wall. Their routines began to overwrite mine, one day at a time, until I started tiptoeing through my own house so I wouldn't interrupt them. They called it helping me. I called it my house. Jessica's first inspection looked harmless. She walked through my living room with her phone out, photographing a window frame, then a baseboard, then the stairs, as if she were building a case file instead of taking pictures. "This plaster crack could mean shifting," she said. "And these stairs. Margaret, this is a fall risk, fall risk." She said it like a clinical label, like I was a chart, not a person. She began to speak in a tone that didn't invite disagreement. "We need updates. This isn't about style, it's about safety. Your safety." When I tried to laugh it off, she didn't laugh back. She started talking about liability, about code, about what insurance companies look for. Words that sound responsible until they're aimed at you like a weapon. David nodded along beside her, as if he were listening to an expert instead of his wife. "Mom's always been stubborn about repairs," he said, "but she's getting older. We can't ignore risks." I sat right there at my own breakfast table while my son discussed my life as if I weren't present. He spoke like a witness. Jessica spoke like a professional. And the strangest part was how quickly my opinions became optional. Then Jessica's updates started arriving as estimates. contractor visits I didn't schedule, assessments I didn't request, conversations I didn't agree to having, until they were repeated back to me as if I'd signed off on them. "We already talked about this, Mom," David would say, calm and certain. "You said you wanted it done." I would search my memory like a person searching a junk drawer in the dark. I would come up empty, then blame myself for the emptiness. Jessica's tone never changed. It was always reasonable, always concerned, always one step ahead of me. This place needs professional help, not amateur hour. The first time I noticed the money, I told myself it was a mistake, a charge from a hardware store that wasn't mine, a consultation fee that made my stomach tighten, an invoice I didn't recognize, hundreds then thousands, stacking up in neat lines on my bank statement, like someone else's life was being paid for with my name. When I asked David about it, he didn't hesitate. "Mom, the outlets were sparking. Jessica was worried you'd have a fire. We had to act fast. His certainty was its own kind of pressure. Jessica would stand behind him, nodding, and my doubt would fold in on itself. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I hadn't been paying attention. Maybe I was the problem, but the charges didn't stop. They multiplied. They spread. And then the changes appeared, quietly, officially. My checking account was suddenly linked to a new savings account for household management. My online banking password had to be reset because of security. The alerts I relied on stopped arriving. Statements went paperless without my consent. A P.O. box appeared on my account profile, an address I had never opened, never visited, never seen. And the transfers, not one dramatic theft, not a single giant withdrawal, just steady movement, like water siphoned from a glass, so slowly you don't notice until you taste air. When I finally added it up, my hands shook so badly I had to sit down at my kitchen table. $47,000 over 18 months. And next to it, on another line that made my mouth go dry, was a beneficiary update I didn't remember authorizing. When I confronted Jessica, she produced a folder, thick with paper and confidence. "We're protecting your assets, Margaret," she said. "Estate planning, tax advantages. We went over this with an advisor." She slid a page toward me and pointed at a signature that looked like mine and still didn't feel like mine. Too careful, too neat. Like someone had traced my name until it behaved. Then she mentioned it casually, as if it were just another sensible household task. "Also, we scheduled an insurance review. It's routine. We'll handle it." My name was still on the deed, but not the decisions. The isolation came next, and it was so quiet I almost missed it. Phone calls stopped coming in the way they used to. Invitations dried up. People I'd spoken to weekly became people I hadn't heard from in ages. When I asked about Donna, my closest friend, David frowned at me with a softness that felt rehearsed. "Mom, Donna moved to Phoenix in January. Don't you remember?" She called to say goodbye. I remember staring at him, trying to place the lie inside my own timeline. Because in my mind, I'd talked to Donna recently. I could hear her laugh. I could picture the photo she'd shown me of her granddaughter. But when you're being told, gently, over and over, that you're confused, you begin to doubt the order of your own days. Doctor appointments became group events without my permission. Jessica insisted on sitting in the room. She answered questions meant for me before I could speak. She used words like compliance, cognitive changes, medication management, as if she were briefing staff. "She's been forgetting things more often," Jessica said once, right in front of me. "Missing appointments, mixing up dosages. We're worried." I opened my mouth to correct her. I couldn't get a full sentence out before she added another detail, another example, another concern that sounded so specific it made me hesitate. Even my own voice started to feel like unreliable evidence. Then the county outreach visit was canceled, without me ever speaking to anyone. They called this morning, Mom, Jessica said. Since we're here helping full-time, they said the check-in isn't necessary. I never heard the phone ring. I never heard a voicemail. I never heard anyone ask what I wanted. The house filled with their schedules, their paperwork, their decisions. And my world narrowed to the rooms they allowed me to occupy without complaint. The last friend who tried to visit never made it past the door. The safety improvements started so small, I almost felt guilty for noticing them. I was trying to keep my peace, to stay out of the way, to survive my own house without giving Jessica a reason to call me difficult. But the house itself began to feel slightly re-aimed, like someone had moved the floor under my habits by an inch at a time. The first change was a new bath mat in my shower, thick, plush, the kind you'd buy for comfort. Jessica said it was to prevent slips, but it was placed exactly where my feet naturally landed, and the rubber backing didn't lie flat the way it should have. The edge caught, just enough to make the surface uneven when water hit it. Not an obvious hazard, a plausible one. A few days later, the handrail on the stairs felt different under my palm. David had tightened it, he'd said, like he was proud of himself. But when I gripped it on my way down one morning, it shifted. Not fully, just a subtle give, enough to throw my weight forward and make my heel miss the next step. I stumbled down 3 stairs before I caught myself against the wall, my shoulder slamming hard enough to leave a bruise that bloomed dark by lunchtime. I stood there, breathing through my nose, staring at the railing like it had betrayed me. Then I ran my fingers along the brackets. The paint around them looked too fresh. The screw heads didn't match the old hardware, and the holes, if you knew what to look for, weren't the same holes I'd lived with for decades. I was still crouched there when Jessica found me. "Margaret, what are you doing?" The handrail almost gave out. David said he fixed it, but it feels worse than before. She glanced at it the way people glance at a lamp that's always been in the corner. "It looks fine to me. Maybe you grabbed it wrong. You know how these old things can be tricky." Old things. She said it like that included me. That afternoon, I noticed the rug at the bottom of the stairs had been rotated. It wasn't crooked. It wasn't sloppy. It was perfect, set like a marker, waiting where my feet would go without my brain ever voting on it. The rug was perfectly positioned where I'd naturally step. I told myself to be rational. I told myself grief and isolation can make you jumpy. I told myself I was 75, not a detective. But the next change came quickly, and it came with David's face, soft, concerned, and somehow impatient all at once. I found him in my bedroom with tools spread across my dresser, the smoke detector hanging slightly away from the ceiling. "What are you doing in here?" "Updating your alarm, Mom. This one's outdated. I'm making sure you're safe." He held up a sleek new detector like a prize. "This has carbon monoxide detection too, and they all connect, so if one goes off, they all go off." I watched his hands more than I watched his smile. He handled the old detector carefully, like it mattered what it looked like when it left my ceiling. He slipped it into a plastic bag before tucking it into his toolbox. "Why are you taking the old one?" "It's just junk now, Mom. I'll dispose of it." Dispose. Another word that sounded normal until it landed on my skin. "The insurance inspector tested that alarm," I said. "Not long ago. He said it was fine." David didn't blink. "Mom, you're mixing things up. That was the water heater. The smoke detector hasn't been checked in years." I knew what I remembered. I also knew how calm he sounded while he rewrote my memory for me. Later that night, when I asked him again, quietly, like I was afraid of my own question, he sighed and put a hand on my shoulder the way you soothe someone in a hospital waiting room. "We're trying to help you, Mom. Jessica worries because you forget things. We can't ignore it forever." "Forget things like what?" He paused just long enough to make the next part feel careful. Like appointments, like conversations, like whether something happened the way you think it did. If it keeps getting worse, we may need a proper evaluation, just to be safe. My stomach tightened. It wasn't a threat with teeth yet, but I could see the outline of the bite. David, I'm not confused. He looked at me like I'd said something heartbreaking. Mom, you're imagining things. We're protecting you. The insurance letter arrived on a Thursday morning in February. It was addressed to me, but the envelope had already been opened, cleanly, like someone didn't want to crease it. Jessica set it beside my coffee, as if she were delivering mail, not motive. Your renewal came in, she said. We updated a few things. I read slowly because the older you get, the world gets louder and paper gets more important. My life insurance coverage had doubled. There was a new accidental death rider. The numbers stacked up in neat, reasonable rows that didn't feel reasonable at all. The premium had changed too. What I used to pay each month was now nearly 3 times as much. And there was a due date circled in bold print like a countdown. I didn't ask for any of this, I said. Jessica sat down across from me and folded her hands like a professional. It made sense, Margaret. The house is worth more now. David lives here. We're being responsible. Since when do you speak to my agent? She didn't flinch. Last month, during that appointment you missed, I went in your place to handle the paperwork. You signed the authorization that morning. She slid a form across the table. My name was there in ink. It was shaped like my signature. It even used the same little loop I'd used for years. But it felt wrong in my chest, the way a key feels wrong when it fits too smoothly. Then I saw the beneficiary page, David and Jessica listed together. Jessica named as the primary contact. Everything routed through her. My coffee went cold, while my mind tried to stay warm enough to think. The beneficiary signature looked like mine, but wasn't. That night, I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because I didn't trust my face to stay neutral in the kitchen. I lay on my side, listening to the quiet movements of a house that used to soothe me. The baby monitor on my nightstand was something I'd kept from when my granddaughter stayed over. I'd never bothered to unplug it. It sat there like an old habit, collecting sound. I didn't mean to listen. I couldn't help it. Their voices rose and fell downstairs, picked up by the tiny speaker with unforgiving clarity. David spoke first, tense, low. The adjuster comes Thursday. If she has another accident before then, the payout jumps again. Jessica answered like she was reading from a list. Then it has to look clean, no obvious mistakes. She's been checking the rail, David said. She's getting suspicious? Then stop giving her reasons to check, Jessica replied. We have less time than we thought, less time. 2 days until Thursday, 48 hours for something to happen without looking like it happened. My hands shook as I reached toward the monitor, and that's when I saw the red light blinking steadily in the dark. There was still a memory card inside, still saving their words like a witness who never slept. They didn't know the baby monitor was still on. Friday morning, I called in sick to the volunteer shift I'd been doing at the library for 8 years. David and Jessica left for what they called errands, and I watched their car disappear down the street like the last thread holding the house together had just been cut. I checked the clock twice, 3 hours, maybe less, before they came back. I didn't need courage. I needed procedure. I needed someone who knew what to file, what to freeze, and what to say so that "my son is trying to kill me" didn't sound like a confused old woman spinning stories. That was the first problem. I couldn't ask anyone. They monitored who I spoke to. They had trained my world to shrink, and the moment I reached outside their control, they would feel it. I pulled an old phone directory from the drawer where I kept things I never used anymore. The paper smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner. I ran my finger down the listings with a steadiness I didn't feel. I found a small ad with 2 words that looked like a door. Asterisk, asterisk, elder law. Asterisk, asterisk. It listed the exact phrases I couldn't bring myself to say out loud. Financial exploitation, guardianship defense, emergency consult. My hand hovered over the receiver for a full breath. Then I dialed before I could talk myself back into silence. Law office, this is the receptionist. How can I help you? I swallowed once. The words still tasted unreal. I think my son and his wife are trying to make my death look accidental for insurance money. There was no pause, no laughter, no soft voice asking if I was safe, in that patronizing way people use with the elderly. Do you have documents? Anything you can bring in today? Documentation. I looked around my bedroom and realized the evidence had been living with me all along. Letters opened before I saw them, statements rerouted, signatures that looked like mine but didn't feel like me. Yes, I said. Bank statements, insurance paperwork, and a recording. We can see you this afternoon, 2:30. Bring everything. 2:30 meant I had to leave the house without drawing attention. It meant I had to return and act normal afterward. It meant I had to walk back into the kitchen with the people who were counting down my days. I was gathering papers into a tote bag when I heard tires in the driveway. They were back early. I held still, listening to the click of the front door, the familiar rhythm of footsteps that no longer felt familiar. I forced my face into the expression they expected to see, tired, compliant, unthreatening. Then David's voice floated up the hallway. Mom, you awake? In bed, I called back. Still not feeling great. I heard the kitchen drawers open, the refrigerator hum. Jessica's soft laugh, light, careless, like there wasn't a deadline in her mind with my name on it. I waited until they left again an hour later. When the house quieted, I moved fast. Every paper I touched felt like it could save me or bury me. The office was not impressive. It wasn't a marble lobby or a glass tower. It was a small suite tucked between everyday storefronts, the kind of place people go when they're desperate enough to need help, more than they need appearances. That made it feel safer. The attorney who met me looked close to my age. His hair was mostly gray. His hands were steady. His eyes had the tired focus of someone who had heard too many versions of the same cruelty. He didn't ask me if I was exaggerating. He asked me to start at the beginning and stick to facts. So I did. I laid the documents across his desk. The insurance renewal letter that had already been opened, the policy changes I never requested, the beneficiary page that rerouted everything through Jessica, and the bank statements showing transfers I hadn't authorized. I added a few printed photos, close-ups of the stair rail hardware, the fresh screw holes, the details my body had noticed before my mind accepted them. Last, I placed the tiny memory card in the center like it was a tooth. He read in silence for a long minute. Then he spoke in plain language, the way you speak when someone is frightened and needs clarity more than vocabulary. What you're describing is elder financial abuse. The account changes, the isolation, the pressure to sign, and the accidents, if we can show intent, become criminal. He tapped the beneficiary page with one finger. And the signature? It doesn't look signed in one natural motion. It looks copied. My stomach turned the way it had turned when I first saw it. So I'm not crazy, I said quietly. He looked up at me. No, you're seeing it correctly. Then he played the recording. My son's voice filled the room, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Jessica's voice followed, calm as if she were scheduling a haircut. When the recording ended, the attorney closed his laptop and said 3 words that changed everything. Undue influence. Asterisk, asterisk. He explained it simply, how abusers isolate, control information, rewrite memory, and use concern as a leash. How courts recognize the pattern when you can show the pattern. Pattern. That word mattered. It meant this wasn't just my shame. It was a known shape with a name, and names could be filed. Then he leaned forward and lowered his voice. You mentioned a capacity evaluation and missed appointments. Have they threatened guardianship? My throat tightened. Jessica keeps saying an evaluation, like it's for my benefit, like I'm the problem that needs paperwork. He nodded once, like he'd seen this play before. Then we act fast, today. He wrote a list on a legal pad, short lines, no drama, just steps. First, we notify your bank's fraud department and put a hold on changes. Second, we move to freeze accounts and block any policy changes while we file. Third, we contact Adult Protective Services so there's an official record and a case number. Fourth, we prepare an emergency hearing request because you're in immediate danger. I stared at his handwriting, so clear it made me want to cry. Can you really do that? You own your home. You're competent unless a court says otherwise, and we are not going to let them manufacture that. But you have to do your part. Tell me. Go home and act normal. Don't confront them, don't warn them, and start securing evidence the right way. Photos, copies, dates. If anything feels unsafe, you call me or you call 911. He slid a card across the desk with a direct number written on the back. I held it like it weighed more than paper. It felt like authority I could touch. On the drive back, my mouth kept trying to form a sentence I hadn't said in 3 years. Asterisk, I have rights. At home, Jessica was in the kitchen, cooking with ingredients I hadn't bought, using my pans like they were hers. David sat in the living room, watching television on a package I never ordered. The normalness of it made my skin crawl. How was your day, Mom? David asked. His tone was gentle. His eyes were not. They searched my face like a thermometer. Quiet, I said. I stayed in bed. This flu has me wiped out. I watched relief loosen his shoulders. Weak, still, predictable. That was the version of me they needed. That night, after they settled downstairs, I began my own investigation. I didn't rummage. I documented. I photographed the stair rail brackets from 3 angles. I photographed the bath mat placement. I photographed the smoke detector model numbers, the dates on the packaging, the places where safety had become control. I wrote down the day and time beside each photo because memory can be argued with. Paper is harder to argue with. Every 2 pages of documentation, I stopped and asked myself one question. Asterisk, if I disappeared tomorrow, could someone understand this without me? That question kept me moving. I copied bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers. Asterisk, asterisk, $47,000 over 18 months. And highlighted the patterns, the new linked account, the rerouted statements, the thresholds that required approval. The numbers didn't just show theft. They showed confidence. They showed routine. They showed how long they thought they had. Then I found something that made my hands go cold. In a folder tucked behind other paperwork were printouts about insurance benefits and policy updates, the kind of reading Jessica always did under the banner of being responsible. It wasn't a confession. It didn't need to be. It was a motive disguised as research. I didn't read every line. I didn't need to. I photographed the headings, the dates, the margin notes in her handwriting. I kept it simple and factual, the way the attorney had taught me. I slid the folder back exactly where it had been. That's when David came upstairs. I heard his footsteps in the hallway and the pause outside my door. The moment where he decided whether to knock. Then the doorknob turned. Mom, you up? I snapped my phone screen dark and forced my voice into a sleepy rasp. "Just water," I said. "My throat's dry." His eyes moved past me, over the dresser, over the open drawer. I hadn't had time to close all the way. He stared at it a second too long. "Have you been going through paperwork?" he asked. "Looking for my heating bill," I said. "I thought it was due." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You should let us handle that, Mom. You get overwhelmed." He left the room, and I waited until his steps faded before I exhaled. I hadn't been caught. Not exactly, but the house had shifted again. Asterisk, asterisk, the bank records told a story they thought was secret. Asterisk, asterisk. By midnight, I had copies of everything that mattered. The insurance pages, the beneficiary change, the bank transfers, and the recording itself saved safely outside that tiny card. I didn't feel brave. I felt methodical. And methodical was the only way to survive people who treated murder like a schedule. The attorney called the next morning. His voice was calm, but faster than before. "We have an emergency hearing window in 72 hours, he said. "We'll file immediately. Until then, you keep your cover. If they escalate, you leave and call me." 72 hours, I repeated. "Yes, and we'll use those hours." I looked around my bedroom in my house, and understood something with a clarity that felt like steel. This wasn't going to be settled by pleading. It was going to be settled by signatures that were actually mine, by orders with a judge's stamp, by people in uniforms and office badges who didn't care how charming Jessica sounded at my table. I lowered my voice, even though I was alone. "What do we do first?" He didn't hesitate. Asterisk, asterisk, we move at dawn. They won't see this coming. Saturday morning, I called my sister. The conversation had to sound ordinary in case David or Jessica were listening, but I needed her to hear what I couldn't say. "Linda, I was thinking of coming for a visit, maybe a long weekend." "Margaret, that's wonderful, but what about David and Jessica? Don't they need you there?" "I think they could use some space, and I could use some sunshine." Her voice shifted, just slightly. My sister had known me my entire life. She didn't need a confession. She needed a cue. "How long were you thinking of staying?" "I don't know yet. Maybe until things settle down here." "Book the flight," she said. "I'll pick you up." I hung up and didn't give myself time to shake. David was in the garage. Jessica was out. I had a narrow window to do the first thing my attorney told me to do. Get somewhere my fear wasn't useful to them. I called a taxi company and packed one suitcase with the essentials: documents, medication, a spare sweater, and the small folder of copies I'd started keeping where they couldn't easily find it. I took nothing that would look like a move. Just enough to look like a visit. The driver who pulled up was a woman about my age. She looked at my suitcase, then at the house behind me, the house I'd lived in for 43 years, and her eyes held on mine for half a second longer than polite. "Airport?" "Yes, please." As she lifted my suitcase into the trunk, she asked, almost casually, "Are you running away from home?" "Something like that," I said. On the ride, I sent 3 messages. One to David and Jessica, light, breezy, harmless. I'd decided to visit Linda for a few days. One to Linda with the flight details, and one to my attorney with a single word we'd agreed on: go. When the plane lifted off that afternoon, I stared down at the patchwork of streets and roofs and felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not relief, not yet, just distance, physical distance, the one thing they hadn't been able to forge. My attorney had warned me the next part would be fast and ugly. Once the legal filings landed, they would have a short window before they realized the money had stopped moving. They would panic. They would call. They would demand I return. And if they couldn't get me back with guilt, they'd try fear. Linda met me at baggage claim and hugged me so tightly I had to close my eyes. "What happened, Maggie?" No one had called me Maggie in years. Hearing it made me realize how long I'd been living as someone else's version of myself. They were going to make my death look like an accident, I said. She didn't ask if I was sure. She didn't ask for details. She just nodded once, as if her body had already decided what her mind was still catching up to. Then you're staying here as long as you need. By Monday morning, my attorney called with the kind of calm that only comes from paperwork already stamped. The court granted emergency restrictions, he said. Your accounts can't be accessed or changed without authorization. The insurance carrier has also been notified to place a hold while this is investigated. I was sitting outside with coffee, watching small desert birds hop across the gravel like they owned the world. The air smelled clean and sun-warmed. Normal life. Life without footsteps on the stairs making me count my breaths. What happens now? I asked. Now we let them find out they can't touch your money. That usually happens within a day. He was right. It didn't even take the full day. The freeze hit mid-morning. I knew because David called minutes later. His voice tight with panic he couldn't quite disguise. Mom, there's a problem with your bank account. The card isn't working, and they said there's some kind of hold. A hold, I repeated, letting the words sit there like a mirror. They said it's legal, a court thing. Do you know anything about this? I could hear Jessica in the background, sharp and demanding, the sound of someone trying to regain control by volume alone. I don't know anything about a legal order, David, I said evenly. Maybe you should speak to the bank. I did. They won't tell me anything. Mom, where are you? We need to go in together and fix this. I'm visiting Linda. I told you that. You need to come home. This is serious. For 3 years, serious had meant, and I obeyed. Now it meant I could choose. I'm not coming home today, I said. Silence. Then his voice dropped, pleading and threatening in the same breath. Mom, if you don't come back, we could lose the house. I looked out at the bright, indifferent sunlight and felt my spine straighten. It's my house, David. You can't lose what was never yours. I ended the call and turned off my phone. That afternoon, I did the next hard thing. I made it official. My attorney had told me that a police report mattered, not because I needed drama, but because systems move when there's a case number and a documented statement. He gave me a direct contact where I was staying, someone trained to take elder abuse seriously and forward it the right way. At the local station, everything smelled like disinfectant and printer paper. The waiting area was quiet, which made my own heartbeat feel loud. The detective who met me was younger than I expected, with a kind of focused attention that made me feel like my story belonged in a file, not in a therapy session. Are you in immediate danger right now? She asked. Not right now, I said. But I have evidence that my son and his wife have been trying to take my assets and make my death look accidental. She didn't raise an eyebrow. She didn't soften her voice. She nodded once and opened a folder. All right, start at the beginning. I gave her the facts, the insurance changes, the beneficiary routing, the bank transfers, the pattern of safety improvements that weren't about safety. I played the recording. I handed over copies, not originals, the way my attorney instructed. The detective listened without interruption, then looked up at me with a seriousness that made my throat tighten. Ma'am, this isn't a family dispute, she said. This is criminal conduct, and you have credible evidence. We're going to document your statement and forward it to investigators where you live, along with your attorney's filings and the Protective Services report. I signed statement after statement, each one turning a year of fear into a line of record. Transfers, insurance, isolation. Threats disguised as concern. My life reduced to pages, except this time the pages were on my side. When I walked out into the evening air, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. The certainty that authority could be a shield, not a weapon used against me. They had spent years convincing me I was confused. In 2 hours, a detective had treated me like the most credible witness to my own life. Thursday morning, I flew back home, not because David demanded it, not because Jessica tried to guilt me into it, but because my attorney called with 4 words that changed everything. The orders are signed. I'd been away for 6 days, 6 nights of sleeping without listening for footsteps, 6 mornings of taking my medication without suspicion, 6 days of being treated like a competent adult instead of a problem to be managed. My sister drove me to the airport with the kind of quiet steadiness I used to think only mothers could have. "You sure you're ready for this, Maggie?" "I'm ready." Ready wasn't the same as prepared for what I saw when the taxi dropped me at my own front door. David and Jessica were sitting on my porch like they owned it. Jessica had a folder of papers on her lap. Documents, the kind she always waved around like proof that she controlled the truth. David was on his phone, speaking in the urgent, frustrated tone of someone trying to undo a disaster he didn't understand. They looked up when I stepped out of the taxi, and for a moment I saw something I'd never seen on their faces before. Uncertainty. For 3 years, they'd controlled every choice I made. Now, I was standing in my driveway with a suitcase they hadn't packed and a return ticket they hadn't approved. "Mom, thank God you're back. We need to talk." Jessica stood too, clutching the folder like it could shield her. "Margaret, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Some legal filing froze your accounts. We need your signature on a few papers to fix this." I looked at them, my son with his rehearsed concern, my daughter-in-law with her practiced authority, and felt something settle into place, like a bolt sliding shut. Cold clarity. "I'll be right with you," I said. "I'm expecting company." At exactly 2 o'clock, a marked vehicle turned into my driveway and parked with the calm precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. A uniformed deputy stepped out, papers in hand. His presence changed the air on my porch the way a storm changes the air before it arrives. Their confident expressions didn't vanish all at once. They fractured, first in Jessica's eyes, then in David's mouth. "David Patterson? Jessica Patterson?" the deputy asked. "Yes," David said, and his voice had gone smaller than I'd ever heard it. "You're being served," the deputy said. "Emergency protective orders and injunctions in an elder abuse case filed by Margaret Patterson." He didn't shout. He didn't dramatize. He simply read what the court had authorized. No access to my accounts, no contact regarding my insurance or property, no involvement in medical decisions, and a date set for a hearing. The words carried across the quiet street, and I realized with a strange satisfaction that neighbors were listening, hearing at last something official, instead of whatever story Jessica had been feeding them. "This is insane," David said, turning to me. "Mom, tell him this is a misunderstanding. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. There's no misunderstanding, David." Jessica skimmed the pages with quick eyes, her face paling as she reached the section about consequences for violating the order. She lifted her chin, trying to recover her tone. "These are temporary," she said tightly. "They can be withdrawn. Margaret, you can stop this any time you want." "I won't be stopping it," I said. The deputy handed them the papers and looked at me with the kind of respectful attention I'd forgotten I deserved. "Ma'am, do you feel safe remaining in the residence with them present?" "For now," I said. "But I'm not alone anymore." He gave me a number to call if I needed immediate assistance, then walked back to his vehicle and drove away, leaving David and Jessica on my porch, holding pages that dismantled 3 years of manipulation. For the first time, they weren't directing the scene. They were trapped inside it, The hearing came quickly, fast enough that my fear didn't have time to grow back around me. The courthouse wasn't dramatic. It was fluorescent lights, wooden benches, and the quiet shuffling of paperwork. The judge didn't look like television. She looked like someone who had seen too much and learned not to be impressed by performance. My attorney had told me what mattered: facts, receipts, and pattern. Not tears, not speeches, so that's what we brought. The recording was played. My son's voice, familiar and foreign, filled the room. Jessica's voice followed, controlled, practical, stripping the last soft illusion from the word family. Then came the documents, the insurance changes I never requested, the beneficiary routing through Jessica, and the bank records showing $47,000 moved without my authorization over 18 months. Photos followed, hardware that didn't match, placement that didn't make sense, safety that looked, in hindsight, like rehearsal. David's lawyer tried to talk about misunderstandings and family tension and intentions. But there's a limit to what words can do when the timeline is written down. The judge reviewed the evidence in silence, turning pages with slow, methodical care. Then she looked directly at David and Jessica. The evidence of financial exploitation is overwhelming. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. And the recording demonstrates intent to harm Mrs. Patterson for financial gain. The orders were extended and strengthened. All access was revoked. Any contact about my assets, medical decisions, or property would go through court-approved channels only. Then the judge added something that made the room feel smaller. A forensic review of Mrs. Patterson's finances will be ordered. Any funds transferred without authorization will be subject to restitution. This matter is also being referred for potential criminal review. David half stood, his face flushing. Your Honor, this is our family home. We've been living there for years. You can't just... The judge didn't let him finish. You have been living in your mother's home at her discretion. That discretion is withdrawn. You have 72 hours to remove your belongings and surrender all keys and access devices. Jessica gripped David's arm and pulled him back down. She understood what he apparently didn't. The game was over, and arguing only made the record worse. I walked out of that courtroom with a folder of orders that gave me back control of my own life. David and Jessica walked out with 72 hours and nowhere left to hide behind paperwork. That afternoon, I made one more call, not to beg, not to bargain, but to close the last door they'd been using. A locksmith arrived before evening. He worked quickly, professionally, without asking questions that weren't necessary. Every lock was changed, every code was reset, every spare key was accounted for and replaced by new metal that belonged only to me. You've got a beautiful house, he said, tightening the last screw. You deserve to feel safe in it. By the time the sun lowered, David and Jessica's keys were useless pieces of metal. Their access was gone, not because I asked, but because it had been removed, officially and physically. A moving truck took what they considered theirs. The porch went quiet. The upstairs footsteps stopped. I stood in my kitchen and made tea with my own kettle on my own stove. The house sounded different, not louder but honest. No whispered planning through walls. No soft commands disguised as concern. No sense that the air itself was being watched. I opened the windows and let fresh air push out 3 years of their presence, room by room. I walked slowly through the house, touching doorframes like you touch the edges of a life you're reclaiming. My house, my keys, my locks, my life. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I fell asleep in my own bed without fear. The criminal case landed 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other Tuesday, until my phone rang at 8:15. It was my attorney. His voice was steady. the kind of steady that means paperwork has already moved and no one can talk their way out of it. Mrs. Patterson, the prosecutor's office filed formal charges. Your son and his wife have both been charged in connection with elder abuse and financial exploitation. There are additional counts tied to the insurance changes and the forged signatures. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee in my favorite mug, the one with a small chip on the rim that Jessica used to criticize, as if even my comforts were evidence of incompetence. It tasted better without anyone watching me drink it. What does that mean now? I asked. It means the case is moving forward, he said. There will be hearings, and there are real consequences if they're convicted. More importantly, it means there's an official record that can't be rewritten by charm or denial. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not celebration, not joy. A kind of grim satisfaction that justice, at least on paper, still had teeth. The financial investigation hit even harder than the charges. When the forensic review came back, it didn't just confirm the transfers I'd already found. It expanded them, line by line, until the story on the page became impossible to look away from. Not just the $47,000 moved without my authorization. More charges routed through accounts I didn't recognize, payments that weren't mine, balances that never belonged to me, money siphoned in careful increments, the way you drain a person without leaving fingerprints. The final total sat on one page like a bruise you can't cover, $88,000 over 3 years. My own money had funded the life they lived inside my house and the plan they built around removing me from it. Then the investigator found something else that rearranged my memory with one cold click. The marriage trouble story David had used to get through my door wasn't a crisis. It was a strategy. The timeline didn't match his version. It never had. For 3 years, I'd been living inside a lie designed to make me feel generous. The insurance company's fraud team opened their own review. I didn't get dramatic details. I got letters. I got calls where people spoke carefully and wrote down every sentence I said. They asked for copies of the policy changes. They asked for documentation. They asked for the recording. The outcome wasn't emotional. It was procedural, quiet, decisive, and humiliating for the kind of people who believed rules only existed for others. Certain changes were flagged, certain forms were rejected, certain claims, if anyone tried to file them, would be treated as suspicious and held until investigators finished their work. When one of the representatives used the word fraud, she didn't say it like an insult. She said it like a category in a system that doesn't care whose son you are. But the real fallout wasn't in court filings. It was in voices I hadn't heard in years. After the charges were filed, I called Linda first. My hands shook slightly as I pressed the button, even though I was safe. Old habits of fear don't disappear just because you change the locks. Maggie, thank God, she said when she answered. Thank God you got out when you did. You're not angry, I asked. About me reporting them? There was a small, sharp exhale on the other end of the line, something between grief and rage. Angry? No, she said. I'm proud of you, and I'm sick that it went on this long. Then her voice softened, and I heard something that hurt more than any insult Jessica had ever thrown at me: guilt. I suspected something when you stopped calling me directly, she admitted. For so long, it was always David calling for you, David explaining why you couldn't come to the phone. I told myself they were being protective, but it never felt right. By that afternoon, my phone began to buzz like it couldn't catch its breath. Messages, missed calls, voicemails from people I'd assumed had forgotten me, cousins, old friends, neighbors, people who had noticed my world shrinking but didn't know what to do with the discomfort of it. Some apologized, some cried, some just said my name, like they were testing whether I still belonged to them. The next day, a neighbor knocked on my door. She stood on the porch with her shoulders slightly hunched, like she was bracing for me to slam it in her face. "Margaret, I need to apologize," she said. "They told us you were having memory problems, that visitors upset you. They said it was better to limit contact. She lived only a few houses away. She'd waved at me for years, and Jessica had convinced her I wouldn't even know who she was anymore." Hearing it out loud made my stomach turn, not because it was new information, but because it proved how efficiently Jessica had turned my neighborhood into a wall. The most painful evidence of that recruitment came from my doctor's office. When I requested my records, they came printed in neat pages that smelled like toner and disinfectant. Notes about confusion, memory lapses, missed appointments, a narrative that didn't belong to my body or my mind, but had lived in my file as if it were medical fact. I remembered Jessica in the exam room, answering questions before I could speak. I remembered how she'd smiled at the doctor, how easily she'd worn concern like a badge. She hadn't only been building a case to control my money, she'd been building a case to control my credibility. And now that case was being dismantled the same way it had been built, one document at a time. Consequences began to ripple outward, quietly at first. I didn't get a front row seat to their collapse, and I didn't need one. I heard about changes secondhand, workplaces that put them on leave, accounts they could no longer access, doors that stopped opening when they tried to use the same old leverage. They had built a life around money that was never theirs. When that money disappeared, the scaffolding went with it. I didn't feel sorry for them. What I felt was cleaner than hatred, the satisfaction of watching reality hold. They'd committed harm and were being forced into a system that doesn't accept misunderstanding as a defense when the receipts are numbered, dated, and recorded. The family that mattered, Linda, the relatives who called back, the neighbors who showed up with shaky apologies, were still there. The family that had treated me like an obstacle to an inheritance was now facing consequences they could not charm away. Justice didn't heal everything, but it sorted out which was which. 6 months later, my life had settled into a rhythm I'd forgotten was possible. Quiet mornings with coffee and the newspaper. Afternoons reading books I chose myself. Cooking meals with ingredients I wanted. Simple freedoms that felt like luxuries after 3 years of surveillance. I hired a lawn service, not because I couldn't handle the work, but because I could make that choice without asking permission or bracing for someone's opinion. The young man who came every other Thursday was polite and efficient. He finished, waved, and left. No comments about what I should fix. No suggestions disguised as concern. The security system became second nature. Cameras that I controlled, alarms that I set, locks that only I could open. The difference wasn't the technology, it was consent. Safety that belonged to me felt nothing like safety used to control me. One afternoon, I opened the small drawer by my stove and saw my keys resting there. New metal, new cuts, and no duplicates I hadn't ordered. For a second, I just stood with my hand on the drawer edge, breathing like someone who'd been underwater too long. Then I closed it gently, as if I were putting something fragile back into its place. My neighbors began to come by again, slowly at first, then with the ease of people who no longer felt they needed permission to speak to me. Recipes, neighborhood gossip, a warm loaf of bread left at my door with a note that simply said, "Welcome back." My sister called every Sunday. Normal conversations, no one listening in, no one translating my words into a diagnosis. I started volunteering at the library again, 2 mornings a week with the literacy program. The director welcomed me back without awkward questions, treating me like the competent adult I'd always been. The first day I returned, I shelved books in silence for 10 minutes longer than I needed to, just because I could stand there without anyone checking on me, correcting me, or hovering. My doctor visits returned to what they were supposed to be: medical care, not family conferences. My doctor reviewed my records and corrected the false notes that had been added over time. Hearing it spoken plainly, "There is no evidence of the decline they claimed," did something quiet and powerful inside me. It wasn't vindication, it was gravity returning. The legal process was still moving, dates were set, documents were filed. My attorney didn't promise outcomes. Good attorneys rarely do, but he told me the evidence was strong, and that restitution was being pursued alongside accountability. For the first time in years, the future wasn't a foggy threat. It was paperwork moving in the right direction. But the real victory was quieter than courtrooms. It was falling asleep without checking the locks 3 times. It was answering my phone without wondering who might be listening. It was making financial decisions based on my preferences instead of someone else's agenda. It was walking down my stairs without second-guessing the world beneath my feet. It was taking my medicine without fear attached to the bottle. These weren't dramatic triumphs. They were small daily confirmations that my life belonged to me again. On quiet evenings, I sat in my living room and listened to the sounds of the house: the settling of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator, distant traffic. Sounds that once made me tense now brought comfort, because they were ordinary, and ordinary had become sacred. I learned the difference between being alone and being isolated. Alone was a choice, isolated was a prison. I had chosen to live alone in my own home, to make decisions about my own life, to trust my own judgment, and no one would rewrite my reality again. 1 year later, the case ended the way it should, with consequences and a paper trail they couldn't charm away. Prison sentences were handed down, and restitution was ordered for the $88,000 they took. I still live in my house. I still make my own decisions. I still hold my own keys. And I still sleep through the night. If any part of this feels familiar, trust that feeling. Tell someone safe. Get help. And if you're in immediate danger, call your local emergency number. Share this story, because sometimes the threat is closer than we want to believe.